All right. How are you? Your new username is Michelangelo. I thought maybe he wrote his real name
No.
because it says Michael dot dot dot, but he didn't.
Mm-mm.
Michael Metz.
I've kept Michelangelo now for a little bit.
Yeah,
I, for one, am glad I've always had a nickname and no one knows my real name on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How come I never got a nickname?
I think I thought it was funny for us two to have nicknames and you to have your full name. Not even Mike Metz, but Michael Metz. That's the only reason the intro says what it says, or outro, or whatever.
That's like the number one question that I get about the podcast
Is why you don't have a nickname?
is why I don't have a nickname.
Because it's funny.
Oh, dude, there's lots of nicknames we could call you. Braces.
Don't do it.
Four Eyes. I don't know. Yeah. Other thoughts?
No, I've taken my glasses off since using the little circle lights that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have your blue light glasses, Connor.
I don't. Not today. I do have my beanie here. So I can try to look hipster.
Nice.
Is it pretty cold up there in
It's
Chicago?
like 19 degrees and windy. It is kind of cold.
Holy cow, that's really cold.
Actually, the hipster thing is to have like a little bit of hair coming at the front. There you go.
Does that make the beanie still effective?
Yeah, as long as it covers your ears. I think it's a way I modulate the temperature, because like sometimes if you're inside and you're wearing it like this low, it's too hot. So you just kind of like vent it a little bit and let your forehead go. Cool. It's kind of like cooling rods in a nuclear power plant. That's your forehead in a beanie.
Yep.
Right.
Same thing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, dude.
Mm-hmm.
You should have led with that.
Speaking of power plants, I watched a YouTube video yesterday that I thought was interesting. Joe Pug does an email newsletter every month that really has nothing to do with his music. It's just stuff he found on the internet that's interesting. And we usually have a recipe in there, a YouTube video that's funny, a YouTube video that's interesting, an article or essay or something, or poem. Curated internet stuff, which I care for that. And it was a video from 1951, a documentary on how they make pig iron through a blast furnace. And it's first they do the kind of 50s diagram like you see in the old Action comics or something, that kind of aesthetic of art.
Wait, what's pig iron?
Pig iron is it's a kind of cast iron, I think. It's the same level of metallic purity or whatever on its way to they use it as a ingredient for steel, but some occasionally I think cast iron is made of pig iron. I don't know why it's called pig iron actually, but it was interesting how they layer in the iron ore, then the coke, which is like superheated coal, and then limestone, and then the three, they just like get this thing super, super hot, the blast furnace, which is like stories high. And then it shoots out. It's kind of like a distillery, how it separates the things. Eventually it just gets like this hot liquid iron shooting out of it. And there's the dude like helping it get out. I mean, the proximity of men to pouring out flaming hot metal is pretty crazy. I never really get that close to liquid metal in my career.
Same.
Much less for 12-hour shifts. So
12-hour shifts? Man, the temperature has to be insane.
Yeah, they were wearing like they call it flame-proof clothing or some super heavy clothing. Kind of look like when you go to the dentist and get your X-ray. That kind of heavy stuff.
Probably no beanies in there, huh?
No, or blue light glasses.
Yeah.
How do they look cool, like to the other iron guys?
I don't know. You should ask them. They probably think about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's playing with liquid metal.
But it's interesting too, because I had this conversation at our fishing trip over the summer of like how if you were to go back to, and did we talk about this on the cast? I think we did. If you were just to go back to nothing civilization wise, and you just had people, all the computers were gone, all the buildings were gone. You were just like in the woods. We were thinking about that show Alone in the Arctic, which I think, did you say you watched that, Mike?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like if you had to start civilization over again, how far could you get in one person's lifetime or in a generation? And the question I had was, how do you make metal? Like, I know that there's iron ore, but like if you were going to try to make a sword or a knife or anything, how do you get out of the Stone Age? And that's, I think, isn't it the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age? Is that the order they go in? This is vintage.
Yeah, dude. I have no idea.
Vintage Three Dogs North. We carelessly selected this topic.
Yeah.
I do not know. I do know, to answer that question, well, it would depend on if we had a group of people there. But if it was just me, I could take a little bit before I died. And that's about as far as I would get.
Take a little bit what?
It would just be a little bit of time and then I would die.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That was what my
I'd be
cousin
lucky-
said. That
I
most of
wouldn't
us would just
advance
die.
anything.
Right.
I would just die.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, you'd be lucky to make like a fire, like one.
Big success.
With a, what do you call that when you rub the sticks together?
Is it a friction?
No, you know how they did it in Alone? If they didn't have the flint and steel, they'd make like a little thing where it
Mhm.
spun. It's like it looks like a little mini bow and arrow that spins the thing.
Yeah.
Gosh, we're really knocking it out of the park today.
Yeah.
Looking at the 3H system is the periodization of human prehistory: the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age.
It's not even a copper age, dude.
Yeah, like why is bronze before iron? Is that easier to make? I think of bronze as, maybe it's just because of the Olympics, I think of it as a more precious metal. Isn't that precious? Well, I think we got good feedback from our episode last week. Megan Ulrich said it was particularly deep.
Oh.
Katie Dornbos, and then your friend had texted you, Mike. So 3 people listened last week.
It's a smashing
Which is
success.
as many people as record the podcast.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
true.
thought maybe we could take a page out of John Carney's book and go back and revisit and see if you had any thoughts.
Well,
because it was, are you talking about like the distinction between expectation and desire?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down to do that. Nothing immediately comes to mind. Is there anything that you wanted to directly rehash out, dive back into?
No, I just thought I too left that conversation feeling like we had hit on something that I'd been thinking about and praying about for a while. And the fact that it resonated with 3 people, none of whom are also priests, like just people in the world, moms and whatnot. It made me think a lot about, while we were talking, I thought a lot about people that in my life that I know who desire something deeply that's not being granted. And that was a helpful framework for me of, it doesn't resolve the mystery, obviously, of like, how do you live in the tension of having a deep desire, and yet knowing that you can't put expectations on that desire. You have to let it be free, let God ultimately be free to do what he wills.
Yeah.
And to assent to his will.
What's helpful about that for you?
Because to me, it allows it to be an act of love rather than simply, I think the temptation is like a box ticking. I was talking to someone yesterday, for instance, and they were saying that they were asking for me to pray for someone in their family who's dying, who has young children and is a close relative of theirs, and they were crying, clearly like deeply affected and sad about this, then kept coaching themselves, be like, it's okay though. I know a lot of people are suffering and other, have much worse fates and things like that. And like they were telling themselves like, I'm not allowed to feel this, or something, like coaching themselves into what Catholics are supposed to think when stuff like this happens, rather than just an authentic creed coeur, living in the mystery of the suffering, and thereby opening it up to what God really is saying in this or doing in this situation. It kind of, I don't know, feels like the expectations when they're thwarted, if we live in that framework, we can bottle our desire up too much, So it's very risky to open up and actually want from God. But I think it's much more free and ultimately joyful, although painful. That's a lot of words, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I think I thought about it continuing from the conversation, and I don't think, remind me if we got into it in the last podcast, but I kind of thought about it in terms of just how easy, and I think how often we slip into what might be like the flip side. I don't even know, but where you just kind of default to the repression of desire.
Mm-hmm.
Because it hasn't been, like, the expectation hasn't been met. And so there's that like natural inclination to just try to squash the desire. I mean, that's what Buddhism kind of is at its core, is the, taking away of desire. And so I don't know, I frame the whole thing like suffering in general. I don't think I've told you guys about this, but it's been a really like very real privilege to do this past year. And there's a few people I'm doing a little book club with that we're just reading through. I think it's called Making Sense Out of Suffering by Peter Kreeft. And all the people that are in it with me just have like different scenarios, in their life that like carry a certain heaviness and like sadness to them, and trying to like integrate suffering. And more kind of our goal at the outset was to learn how to think about suffering and engage like the intellect while reverencing the emotions as well. And so we just took this book kind of as our guide and meet every week, every other week, and take on a chapter. And it's pretty free flowing conversation and all that. But I don't know. I don't speak for them I don't know that's been like earth shattering necessarily, but it's been a very real like privilege. I mean, I would say like one of the highlights of priesthood, honestly, to be able to engage it with them like that, just because it's very honest. But that's how Kreeft starts that book, is he actually talks about, he kind of lays out a very good synthesis of, one, the history of Buddhism, but just that whole notion of like repression of desire, and why so many people default to that, especially in today's world. And then he takes such a cool approach to it, of like, he doesn't try to answer the problem of suffering, but he gives you clues from all kinds of different areas of life to be able to look at the mystery, and to kind of put some clues on it that hopefully at least give you a foundation to assent to belief in it. So he starts with the philosophers, kind of walks you through really kind of a short history of philosophy, and then his chapter on the artists and the poets is like it's really phenomenal. And he uses this image of like, they kind of draw you deeper out to sea, and then like, spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't read the book, but then like the prophets get the closest, but even they fall short. But it draws you deeper and deeper, and then like it culminates in the person of Jesus, who he calls the tears of God. So it's just like a really beautiful, I think, title for Jesus and an engagement of suffering. And so anyway, that was that was just kind of my thought anyway after it. I think it's very much like filtered through that really cool book club that I'm in. But it was just like, man, how often do we just just an act of survival, almost like repressed desires there.
Yeah. And I appreciated in our initial conversation about the distinction between the two that, Rob, you mentioned that like we do have to take desire seriously, but like we've kind of mentioned already, that it is a huge risk in order to do that, because there's a type of hope that becomes enfleshed in the desire. And to constantly have your desire not met, or your desire maybe fulfilled in different ways, like it can be a painful process. And Connor, your example is the last time. I mean, specifically poignant, but like the expectant mother, or the mother who uh, can't bear life, and they really deeply desire to bear life. Um, like it's a good example because it contextualizes the conversation in a way that, like, this is not trivial. This is not a little thing. Like, it has little ramifications in my own life. You know, I go home and I have certain expectations and certain desires coupled with it, but then it also stacks up into like the deepest, most important parts of life. And to really take those desires seriously and then be free to give away your expectation, that's not a small thing. That's like a really, really risky and courageous thing to do constantly. Um, and even like I noticed, kind of coming back and thinking about that conversation, even in prayer, going into a holy hour, I can even set up that this is my expectation of what I want to happen in prayer, instead of allowing Christ to fulfill my desire in this prayer, where one is me aiming towards a specific end, and the other is a disposition of receptivity. But when I sit in the desire rather than aiming towards my own expectation, like I have to sit there and wait, and it's a huge risk. And sometimes nothing happens, and that's just an hour in prayer. That's like a little example. But then you play that out in some of like the high risk aspects of life that you're most hopeful for, that you most desire for: life, family, loved ones, filling a home with people. Like, it's not talking about a little thing there. It's talking about something really deep and important. Yeah. But it's a risk. It's a risk.
Yeah. It's also just like deeply mysterious. Like you can't, the thing is, and I think why it's interesting to talk about, but also why like you can't answer it. I mean, I talked to someone that had listened to it as well, and they had like great questions around it. And it was because they became then practical, like, and maybe not necessarily as like the certain heaviness that came with like a mom that's lost a child or something like that, but even like vocationally, like how do I take my desires seriously and then expect that they'll be like fulfilled in a certain way? Like, how does it work? And you have to just kind of like reverence the place. I mean, that's where like hope as a virtue comes in there. But yeah, man, like you can talk around it, you can get at it. I think you can have like, really powerful examples. And I mean, whatever it is, you can have a lot of like really good stuff around it, but you cannot answer it.
Mm-hmm. When you say it, can you maybe flesh that out? What do you mean the answer it specifically?
What I mean, I guess like the yeah, man. It's like the mystery of suffering. I mean, the mystery of longing.
I was going to say longing
in the human heart. Yeah. Of like kind of holding that tension of like letting your desires grow actually and be articulated, and trying not to get hung up on expectations. Like maybe that's it. I don't know how to do that.
Right.
I think it's the fact that it's the living in the human condition of being made for another plane of existence. We're made for God, and we live in the world, which mediates his presence, but isn't God. And we're compromised by sin. So even prior to sin, we'd still have this longing in us that nothing that we could see or possess or manipulate or create on our own could ever answer. We'd always have to look past this world to God who made the world as the answer to the question of our hearts. And we live in that, and we have this tendency to make an idol, to grasp at and create expectations, create systems to kind of hem in and like guarantee that those desires are met or repressed in such a way that I don't have to live with this pain of longing and unanswered need that requires me to hope and love in a way that's transcendent my own ego and myself, and hopeful and trusting in another who provides for that. But yeah, that I'm thinking of Till We Have Faces, which is this book that I read voraciously, but then I got to the end, I'm like, what the heck did that mean? And I listened to Kreeft's talk about it. Actually, I think you sent that, Rob, didn't you? Kreeft has a great...
Metz initially gave it to me, so I could have sent it.
Yeah,
it's
but
a phenomenal talk.
I take credit.
I don't think that Metz understood it, probably. So I'll say that it was from you.
Yeah, he texted me and he was like, "This is a waste of time. Don't listen to it. Yeah.
Do not listen to this."
But he helped make some sense of it, and I think I get the impression that book gets at that question, because it's through suffering that she is clarified to be able to speak her deepest desires to the gods.
Yeah,
that's how she has a face. That's how she has an identity and can see the gods face to face, is because she has like been honest and entered into the consequences of her true longing, or her own, what Giussani calls elementary experience, like in the religious sense. It's not a meme. She's not just imitating other people and what they want, and she's not coaching herself to feel a certain way, but is honestly living out of the place. And and she's babbling for a while until she gets to the heart of like who she is vis-a-vis God.
Yeah.
And can speak her deepest fears and joys and longings and desires at him in an expectant and hopeful way.
Yeah.
And so be addressed. But that's what I see, is like, I think suffering has made me more myself and more confident that I can go into a situation and not have to be a chameleon and figure out, what am I supposed to say? Like, I don't know, just burying both of my grandparents. Now I go into wakes and funerals with a confidence that I didn't have when I was 29 and hadn't done that.
An empathy, dude.
Exactly.
I do, at least. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It makes me think of have you guys, it was recent, like in the last week or two, but Andrew Garfield was on the Colbert show, and I just saw the clip of it. And I still wish that it was Garfield that was in the Silence movie, right? But he has this interview. He's in a new Netflix musical movie. But apparently, I did not know this, but Garfield's mom just passed away recently. And Colbert asked him about it, like midway through the interview. And it was kind of cool to watch, honestly. Like, he starts crying immediately when Colbert brings it up. And he pauses. It takes him a second. And he's like, "Hey, if I start crying, like, just know that it's good, because I love to talk about this." And it was really beautiful how he handled it. But he said at the end, towards the end of their conversation, about her and her influence and like making him want to be an artist and all of this. But he's like, I never want this grief to go away. And it like legitimately didn't seem like a burden. I don't obviously speak for him. It's a little clip, but yeah, it was a cool thing to watch. But I mean, that's a heck of a line. Like, I don't want this grief to go away. And he had a pretty poetic way to say it. It was like unexpressed love for his mom.
Yeah.
And it's like, I told my mom I loved her every day, but like, we still don't have enough time with them. And so like, these tears are just like unexpressed love for her. It's very masculine I mean, it's like a guy weeping on national television. Like, it was very, very masculine to see.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting too. I was asking a friend about this almost exact question the other day. Like, how, as a preacher, do I sell people on loving when the more you love, the more you suffer? That's just almost like a mathematical truth, that he's suffering, that grief means something to him because it reveals his love for his mom. Like, that's, if he stopped feeling sad or sorrow about her death, that would mean he stopped loving, or to some extent. That's how I read him saying that. He wants to carry this with him, not because he wants to feel bad all the time.
Correct.
But because he loves his mom and he would never want to stop loving her, even if that meant escaping from having to feel the pain of being alienated from her for a time until heaven, you know? Which is what I think when I see like an old person, and we see this in old people that like just like say whatever they want because they've got nothing to lose anymore. Like, all their friends are dead and they're just waiting, and they're not trying to impress anybody, you know, like they're totally themselves when it goes well. But that's, yeah, they've like packed all their bags and all their friends have already taken the voyage and they're just sitting there waiting. They're like, all my treasure's over there. But there's still this sorrow, this sadness, this tension.
Yeah, were you going to ask the question, how do you sell somebody on loving when it means more suffering?
Yeah, I guess I got to that point at some point preparing a homily. I'm like, okay, so what do I actually want people to do here? Like, what's the takeaway? And it was like, I want them to love God. And what happens when you do that is that you follow him and you suffer. And you, of course, enter into deeper, more life. And I guess the prosperity gospel is less and less persuasive to me, and more.
Yeah, it is.
So it makes it like, okay, what the truth is like to engage with reality, both interior and exterior, is to embrace this, which is that the only real meaning of human life can be love. That's the only thing that makes any sense of it. And yet the more you do that, the more you let go of yourself and your own expectations and enter into communion with the other, the more you make yourself vulnerable to losing that person, or to being hurt by that person, or to simply be hurt by the nature of existence as we are in this world.
Yeah, you know, man.
People get sick and die.
I relate to that. I mean, I had a wedding last weekend, just awesome, super faithful young couple. And so it was really a delight to celebrate the wedding. And they had their first reading was Tobit. And I mean, really, like, the premise of kind of the meat of the homily was, I was just like, listen, one of the very, very few guarantees that life will give you is that storms are coming. Because the wedding reading for Tobit is like, it's really nice. It talks about Tobiah and Sarah like praying on their wedding night. So you read it and you're like, oh man, cool. Like, couple praying together. And you read the context of the book of Tobit, and it's like they're praying together because a demon is after them to kill them, because like multiple husbands before have been killed. And so they just pray and like they ask God's mercy to come down on them. So use that as like the image for the sacrament that they're like receiving and becoming of in the sacrament of marriage, of like, no, we're here today to like ask God's mercy down on you and to protect you and to be with you. It's like, that's a mysterious thing, man.
It just reminds me of one time I was doing marriage prep with a couple. It was the last one, and they picked their readings, and they picked that prayer of Tobiah and Sarah, and I was like, oh, this is such a nice reading. Actually, it's an interesting story. You know, this is why they're praying this prayer, and explain the whole thing with the demon and whatnot. They both just looked at me like, what? I thought maybe next time I'm not going to explain that. This is a really sweet reading for your wedding. Glad you picked it.
Yeah, it makes me think of it's a super good question. The why do I ask people why does God tell us to love more if it also means more suffering? And what also why are our hearts geared to that? Like I'm willing to risk more suffering if it does mean I can love more. Like that's the Andrew Garfield thing there. As a matter of fact, I don't want to give it away. I'm willing to bear it if it also means that love is present. And um, I listen to a lot of Peterson, and one of the things that he talks about frequently is uh, the need to have responsibility so that you can have a meaningful life, so that the purpose and joy of life is sufficient to keep you moving forward and not be bitter, even when you encounter great suffering. And that's true, but it doesn't answer the question that it seems like the way that he presents it, it's like a checks and balances thing. It's like life is 90% hard, but if your life is 91% good, then like you've got a leg up, So if you have more good than bad, then you can actually drive on with it. And I don't think that's not Jesus. That he does something different, that it's not either good or bad, like suffering or joy, but that he kind of comes and allows us to exist in the tension of the two in a new way, in a radically different way. That says like, no, even in the suffering, there can be love, where it's not either joy or suffering, but it's the possibility of joy in suffering. And I think that's like Christ, he presents that third way to us, which, because you have to ask that question, like maybe if that question doesn't come up in your preaching, then like I'm not getting to the heart of the thing, because it's true. What you're saying is true, that the more that you love, like the more you're being open also to the possibility of suffering. But we're created for love. And that's only possible to pursue if what we say about Jesus is real. And I think that's part of the radicality of Christ, that he opens up the possibility of simultaneously enduring great suffering, but bearing it in love. Um, yeah, and it doesn't answer the question, but I think about JP2's. I think it was an encyclical, but that this transformative power, salvifici doloris, I think is the saving suffering, that the transformational power of Christ in and through suffering. It's just a new way to exist. It's like something so radically other that you couldn't come to that conclusion on your own, but that Christ had to come and kind of reveal that. Yeah, but again, it doesn't answer the question. It just means that it's possible. Mm-hmm. But it's still risky, and it's still hard, but it's also the most real thing, because that's where love resides. I feel like I'm kind of getting into like too abstract here and too far away from what we're talking about.
I think you're talking because we're both. There's something heavy here, dude. And when you said Jesus is the tears of God, that's a Kreeft line. That there's something very true there that hits me deep for some reason. Yeah, these are the questions college students ask. That was an EWTN show that we recorded when I was at Newman in Champaign. These are the ones they ask. No, this is the ones they don't ask, but it's behind every question. It's like, exactly. What's really going on here?
Exactly. Dude, this Kreeft book, Making Sense Out of Suffering, high recommend. He's good. He writes a bunch of it in dialogue with her. He just calls it like reader. And he's good. Like he helps you formulate questions that are even harder than the ones that you had at the beginning.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Yeah. I mean, it's
like Chesterton or Ratzinger, and then they argue their opponent's point better than their opponent does.
Yeah. I mean, his first like couple chapters, he goes to the problem, like the notion of like the problem of pain, and then he goes to explore the problem deeper, just because like you're not asking hard enough questions at the beginning.
Right. That's I guess what the question with the preaching is like, I don't want to, sometimes just like people need advice and like, here's some spiritual platitudes. This will help you, here's some catechesis. This is like an answer to your question apologetically. But I don't just want my preaching to be on that level. Like, what's the, I'm not afraid. I'm not answering questions so that the questions go away. Or at least I don't want to. I don't think you should. Like what you're talking about with Kreeft, it seems to me like he's saying, good, you have a question? Okay, like what's the actual question? And he courageously pursues the question so that you can get an authentic answer, or at least not reduce it to some shortcut answer that doesn't really satisfy and papers over the deeper longing, which that takes a lot of faith and a very honest like integrity.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of integrity in the book. Like in the dialogues at the beginning, the quote unquote reader asks him like, well, if you're not going to answer the question, because he says he's just going to present clues, and I can't remember exactly how he words it, but pretty much asking Kreeft like, well, if you're not going to answer it, like, why go on this endeavor? And he says like, because I have found enough clues to live by. And I mean, it's a beautiful book.
That is definitely it's definitely connected Till We Have Faces.
Oh, yeah, for sure. He talks about Lewis all the time in it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's literally Lewis and Dostoevsky are the two that have like explored it the deepest in his mind.
He does seem to be a great teacher of Lewis. Like, man, oh man, in that talk that he gives on Till We Have Faces, trying to help us understand it, I think he says he's read the book 12 times. 12 times. And he seems to like play with language and see the world in a similar way as Lewis, which it makes sense why he can give such fresh and fruitful commentary on Lewis's works, because he really does know him. And I remember I think it was that talk that followed up Till We Have Faces, that he actually talks about what the human heart is looking for there. It's actually not an answer to the question. And he references back to the book of Job, where Job asks God a question and he kind of calls God to task. And God doesn't answer any of Job's questions, but comes in and kind of makes this like really authoritative, what would seem to like our modern ears and hearts,
like, how dare
like
you,
kind of a harsh response, almost like just a putting him down, but he doesn't answer any of his questions. And Kreeft uses that as an example and says like, because if God answered his question, Job would just have another question. And that's part of like, that's like the little kid instinct. Well, right. Why is that? Well, why is that? Well, why is that? And what's fleshed out until we have faces in narrative form is the only thing that actually satisfies the human heart, which is, it's a face. It's a face.
Yeah, that's kind of like Philip or Thomas saying like, how are we going to go where you're going if we don't know the way? I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Right.
The Job implication with Job is like, if I were to address your questions, that would be to entertain the fantasy that what you're after is the answer to a question, and not me. What you're after is me. That I am the answer. And practically speaking, the question right now for you is, why does this suck? If you love me. And there's no answer that I can give you, because you're just not, you're not the kind of being that can see. Like, I made this beast, Leviathan. Okay. That's an example. Like, I'm big and you're not, and I love you and it's okay. And I am the answer.
Yeah.
The tears of God.
Right. And a part of what you see until we have faces, and maybe this gets to like the expectation desire thing, is you also have to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Like you have to respect the experience that you're going through as well. Doesn't mean that God's going to answer the questions, but you have to go through that process. That is the human process. And it's a way to respect, reverence, and honor our humanity, which then Christ eventually, he does answer it with himself, which is a surprising way to answer it. But it's like, you can't just coach yourself out of asking the questions, but you have to do the Kreeft thing, which is why you have to have a good guide that can actually lead you into asking those deeper questions. And then you can have a face and see the face of God, which is the real answer.
Do you know who the person that wrote the foreword to this book by Kreeft is? Sheldon Vanauken, who wrote A Severe Mercy.
Yeah.
And even the foreword's worth it, man. He talks about, and keep in mind, Kreeft wrote this book like in the 80s. And Sheldon he's like, the world has way too many experts. And like, isn't it interesting how often experts disagree with each other? And he's like, so we don't need more experts. We need guides, like actual wisdom figures. And that's what Kreeft tries to do. Or Lewis.
Yeah.
Do the Kreeft thing. Da, 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 da. That's what I thought of when you said we need to do the Kreeft thing. That should be a dance.
Good
I don't
point.
know what that means. I don't know what that means, Connor.
Yeah, whatever. Go back and listen. I have to get going, guys. This is another gold episode, man. This is going to be an instant classic.
Well, I'm glad that you kind of brought us back to that.
Yeah, that's good.
That's intensity, guys.
Yeah. That it is.
What if we didn't record it?
Be lost.
Remember when we did that?
Like one of the great episodes, right?
One of the great episodes that's been lost to history.
You said it was like tears and rain.
Which I got from Blade Runner. That's what the robot says before he dies.
Circle.
Yep.
Man.
Whoa. All right, later, gamers.
I would love to watch Blade Runner with Peter Kreeft.
I bet you he would like it.
I bet so.
Yeah. All right,
We
peace.
should end.